Now, Snow White is a story that uses the evil stepmom and uses the prince, uses the kingdom, and uses mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all. What we know about fairy tales is, just like with any story in the Bible, you can take every character in the fairy tale and adapt it metaphysically to a part of you, that what is going on with you and what's going on in your life. So oftentimes when you think of the stepmother, it's somebody who's taken the place of. You know, it's not the truth. You know, you can put it in that place that it's not the truth. In this case, the mother, before Snow White was born, wanted a little girl, and she was thinking about what her child would be like, and she pricked her finger when she was sewing. And when she pricked her finger, she was at the window, and it was snowing outside. And 3 drops of blood fell on the snow. Also in fairy tales, you'll find that there's meaning in numbers, like in the Bible. So here's that number 3. And she's going, oh, that's what I want my daughter to be. White as snow, red as blood, and black as ebony. And you can take those ideas and go, white as snow is purity. And you can take the ideas, red as blood is fully alive. And you can take the idea of black as ebony as strong and powerful. So you take these ideas and you put them in the story. But in the story, when Snow White is born, her mother dies. And when her mother dies, the king marries somebody else who's very, very beautiful. And she becomes Snow White's stepmom. And she has this magic mirror that tells her that she's the most beautiful in the land. When we look into mirrors, we find that what comes back is our reflection. And so she saw her outer beauty. She saw her outer beauty. And she was probably an okay stepmom in the facts of what goes on, because we don't know, it's a story and we only get what we get. Until Snow White started becoming of age and her beauty started shining through. And then the queen's mirror told her, well, yeah, you're pretty fair, but there's somebody fairer than you. And she didn't know how to take that. Well, you know, in our humanness, when we reach a potential, something that we're proud of, when we reach that and somebody else takes and reaches it beyond us, what happens? I don't care who you are. Someplace in there is that little spot that says, oh. Oh. I'm not the best anymore. Whatever it is we're at. Can we turn the air conditioner down a little bit more? So this is what happens. At first the queen's going, oh, I don't like this. I'm not the prettiest anymore. And of course, and we notice that this queen is in with her outer beauty. And so she starts to be real envious. And she wants to get rid of Snow White. And she figures the best in the straightest direct shot to get rid of Snow White is to have the huntsman take her out in the forest and take care of her. Well, Snow White pleads with the huntsman in the forest, and the huntsman really doesn't want to kill her, doesn't mind killing animals, doesn't really want to kill Snow White. So he lets her go when she cries, please, please, I'll stay away from the castle, I'll go deep in the forest. And the huntsman goes, well, who will ever know? The animals will get her, she doesn't know how to take care of herself, she's a princess. And so he goes back and says, it's done. And Snow White goes and finds this little cottage deep in the forest. And when she walks in, she sees 7 little plates, and 7 little forks and spoons, and 7 little beds. And there's that number 7, which in spirituality we know is the culmination of us humanly and spiritually. That's that spiritual number. And she falls asleep. And then 7 little dwarfs come home from work and find her there. And they make this little pact, right? So we'll let you stay with us and take care of us, feed us, clean our house, do our laundry, and we will make sure you have a place to home and a place to eat. And so they formed a relationship. Now, what happened though was the stepmother went back to the mirror and she heard, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, am I still the fairest of all?" And the mirror said, "Not quite." So I'm still around. And so what happens is that the dwarfs, being more human than the princess, who was kind of airy because she had never known how to take care of herself, told her, "You need to be careful of your stepmom. She will know, she will come and find you," and they go off to work. Well, to cut the story a little bit shorter, because I can stretch this out, the stepmom comes and in disguise, and she offers laces up Snow White so she can't breathe. The dwarfs come home and go, unlace her, she breathes, and they warn her again. Then the stepmom comes disguised again. This time she brings a poison comb. Now, Snow White knows better than to let this lady in, who she doesn't know who she is, but there's still that part of her who is just plain innocent and just wants to love everybody. And so she said, lets her in. Well, then she gets poisoned by the comb. The dwarves come back, revive her, say, "You need a little bit of wisdom here." And so she takes a breath, and she says, "Okay, I'm going to be good this time." And then dwarves go off to work. Another disguise comes with the apple. Now remember the apple? The stepmother was so determined to get rid of Snow White, had gotten so much into this fix-it attitude, that she thought, okay, I've got the perfect idea. I'll poison half the apple. Then if she questions me, there's only half an apple and I can take a bite out of that. And then she'll get the poison part, which is what occurred. And then Snow White drops dead. This time when the dwarfs come back, after 3 times, they cannot revive her. They cannot revive her. But she is so, so beautiful that they cannot enclose her in a coffin either. So they built a glass coffin so that they can just look upon Snow White, gaze upon her. And for some reason, in this glass coffin, her beauty never wanes. It's always there. It's always there. And then one day a prince comes riding by, discovers her, falls in love with her in this glass coffin, and begs the dwarfs to have her. And they're going, what? Why? And he just cannot give up. So the dwarfs, because they are love, they see him as love, give her to him in love. His lackeys, in taking her back to his castle, trip and fall. The casket breaks open. The prince kisses his beautiful Snow White, and what happens? She awakens. She wasn't dead. She only appeared to be dead. So where am I going with all this, you're saying? Okay, so here's the story, and you're throwing bits and pieces of where are you going? Point 1, the mirror never lies. The mirror never lies. When we look in the mirror, what is it telling us? It's telling us what we want to see. If we want to see an outward beauty, chances are we will see the outward beauty we're looking at. If we want to see that we got warts on our nose, chances are we'll see we have warts on our nose. The mirror is a physical manifestation that reflects back that which we physically are manifesting in our life. Snow White represents that inner quality of beauty that cannot be killed. Stepmom, however, is really a worldly lady, and she just cannot stand it, and she is seeing with her worldly eyes. Snow White doesn't even need a mirror because she is seeing with her spiritual eyes. The mirror never lies. When we look into our mirror in the morning, and we look in and see our Christ selves, and we see our possibility, and we see what we're going to bring forth for the day, that is exactly what's going to be reflected back to us. The second point I want to make is that this is a story about innocence. Innocence coming of age. We are innocent in many different directions. Love is innocent. Unconditional love is innocent. What we learn is that love in and of itself needs wisdom to temper it, or we're going to sabotage what we want. The dwarfs in their human wisdom kept on trying to tell Snow White, be careful. There are people out there that'll get you. Whether it's people or whether it's circumstance or whether it's situations, they will get us if we're not careful. Some of us have learned to love too much, and we forget to marry wisdom with our love. And so then we end up in a space of, why is this happening to me again? Why am I here? Why am I feeling alone? Or why am I feeling like I've sabotaged what I had planned on for my life? It's because we haven't allowed that wisdom, that God-given wisdom to come and grow with us within our love. There's been a lot going on in our personal lives in the U.S. and even in the world in these last few weeks. And it looks pretty ugly. And it's the appearance. It's the appearance of hate, and it's the appearance of fear, and it's the appearance of lack, and it's the appearance of misunderstanding. And many of us want to just love it. But in our loving, are we loving it innocently? We don't understand what's going on. We don't understand why. It's time that we learn to bring in the wisdom and see how we can move our love into action in ways that we can appreciate each other all the time, so that we're not in these spaces. And that means, and I've said it before and I'll say again, that means loving perpetrators, loving the ugliness, loving the appearance as the appearance, and knowing that love is the only thing that'll bring it forward. Love is the only thing that'll bring it forward. So the dwarfs loved Snow White so much that they couldn't let her go. She was so beautiful. There was that attraction there. And so they put her in a box. That's the best that they could do. They couldn't revive her. Excuse me. But they kept her alive in their minds by looking at her. We manifest by keeping those thought ideas alive in our minds so that we can continue to put the energy in them to bring a greater love forward. We awaken to our real self when kissed by the prince. You see, who is the prince? The prince that we all, so many of us women, as young girls have grown up with the idea, oh, we could just only have our prince on the white knight like in the fairy tales, right? We've grown up with this idea, who is the prince? Who is the prince that brings the wisdom, that revives us, that resurrects us, that gives us everything we need? It's the Christ. And we each already have it within us. The Christ within us is our Prince. And yes, when we are open to that kiss, when we are open to receiving that kiss of God, then we are resurrected. Then we are ready for that marriage of the wisdom and the love for the greater good. In the story, at the end, the stepmother receives the invitation to the wedding of a prince. And she just wants to know who this lady is. Finally, she can't stand it. She wants to know who this lady is that is fairer than her, thinking that finally she has done away with Snow White. So she gets herself all gussied up. She hasn't been to the mirror in years. She gets herself all gussied up and ready to go to the wedding of the prince at the castle. And she goes to the mirror one more time and says, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all?" And the mirror says, "Well, you're still second best." And she can't humbly accept it. But she can't stay away from seeing who is prettier than her. Who's got what I don't have? Who's got it? And so she goes there and she is so angry and so eaten up with her envy and her anger that she just blows herself up and dies. You see, that part of us, that not true part of us, that stepmom in us, when we follow our true path, our ascending self, that part of us that is fully alive in our Christ itself, will allow the other part to just blow up and go away. It just isn't there while we're in our authentic self, while we're there. So, does this remind me of anything in the Bible? Well, of course it does. It reminds me of the story of Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. And you remember that Jesus got word that his friend Lazarus was dead. He was dying and he was going to be dead. And he was with his disciples and he said, "You know, I'm going to wait. I'm going to wait." And so he waited a couple days before he started his journey. And his disciple says, "How can you do that?" And he says, "Well, it's for the glory of God. And so that you will know the glory of God." So when he gets there, he meets Martha. And Martha says, and Mary's at home. Mary's at home mourning, and Martha says, "You're too late. He's dead. He's in the grave." And you see that Jesus is visibly stricken. You see, Jesus represents that part of us that's very human and still is mourning what's going on in the outer appearances. Although he has faith and he knows what he's there to do and he's going to do it, his human self is still in that place of mourning and feeling the awkwardness of what's going on. And then he goes and he sees Mary. And she says, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have needed to die." And when Jesus saw her weeping and the Jews who came with her weeping, he was greatly disturbed in spirit and deeply moved. And it goes on to say, see how he loved him. You see, we do love. We are worldly people. We are human. We love our humanness. But there's a part of us that knows so much more. Then Jesus, again greatly disturbed, came to the tomb. It was a cave and a stone was lying against it. Jesus said, "Take away the stone." And Jesus looked upward and he said, "Father, I thank you for having heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I have said this for the sake of the crowd standing here, so that they may believe that you sent me." When he had said this, he cried with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." The dead man came out, just like Snow White. his hands and feet bound with strips of cloth, and his face wrapped in a cloth. Jesus said to them, "Unbind him and let him go." You see, when the stepmother died, that was the unbinding. Snow White was let go. So what did Jesus do? Number one, he waited. He listened with the obedience of God, and he waited. Sometimes when we know that there's something wrong in our life and we want to fix it, we want to fix it now. He waited. He prayed the prayer of thanksgiving. Thank you, Father, I know that you always hear me. Martha and Mary represent those parts of us. Martha is that outer love, and Mary is our inner love. Martha is that part of us that loves everything. Everything out here. Mary is that soul love, that love within us, that loves God, that loves the Spirit, that knows that there is so much more. So the queen in you, the stepmom does not have to live. You can let her go. The Snow White in you can mature so that she can have wisdom to take her innocence into grace. And the prince in you, that Christ of you, is what makes you live happily ever after. When you are faced with a challenge this week, and you will be, there's always temptations. I had a temptation just a couple days ago. You know, when our mind goes off in other directions, that of parents, we aren't always centered in the now moment. I was backing out. My mailbox moved in front of the back part of my car. The temptation was the should myself, the darn myself, to go to all the money I was going to have to pay to have that fixed, to go to the place where I'm not going to tell my landlord that I might have to replace the mailbox. If he doesn't see it, he'll never know. All those evil little places within me, that was a temptation. But my prince came along and said, no big deal. No big deal. You'll take care of it. It's no big deal. Thankfully, it was the mailbox, not a child. So the challenge is, when faced with temptations, to head away from that sense thinking, that worldly thinking, that what is it that's going to hurt me? What are you afraid of, or what are you angered from? And to choose the only response that resurrects, and that is love. God bless.